I don't know how to hold all this up at once. This seems like a dangerous proposal. Then I have to smile on top of it? What? Why do I do this to myself? I don't need to do this. But clearly I'm attempting to do it. Oh, my wrists. Why, ow, why did I do that? I don't even feel like putting these books away. This is just gonna have to be the status of my desk. Hi, hello, my name is Yenna. I'm a modern Ajumma. I'm gonna talk about the books that I read in the month of September. If this is the first video that you are watching of mine, I was gonna say that this is completely unusual, but the chaotic, rushed aspect of it is definitely not. Maybe I can just move them to the side. Okay, it is what it is. And as you can see, in the month of September, I read more books than this, but never so many big books all at once. And I regret to inform you that today's video is forced to be very short, as I'm very short on time. I've been rushing all week. I'm pretty stressed out, but I know that my perfectionist OCD-ness will not allow me to not upload a September video in a timely fashion. It's one of those, if I let this one thing fall, everything else is gonna drop, so I can't let this one thing drop. So it's gonna have to be what it is. I read 16 books in September, a lot of them very thick chunkers. Every month it seems like I'm reading a random assortment of books. Let's get into each one, however brief they may be. I just wasted even more time trying to look for my copy of Audition by Katie Kitamura somewhere here. I mean, maybe it's someplace else in the plethora of stacks of books that I have elsewhere in my home, but I made a note to mention that I had read Audition by Katie Kitamura a couple months ago, ran out to Barnes & Noble to buy a hardcover edition. I immediately loved it so much. I wanted to just mention, this is like a PSA. I watched Alyssa, the Nerdy Nurse's video about wanting to live in these books. So I made a video after watching hers talking about the books that I also want to live in. But another thing that I enjoy doing and often do when I am reading a book is I like, especially if it feels very cinematic, I love casting and imagining who I would cast. And so instantly when I was reading Audition by Katie Kitamura, and I was saying this in this video that I ultimately scrapped because I'll get to why in a minute, but I was instantly seeing Lucy Liu as the actress, Charles Melton as the other guy. No spoilers. I saw Lucy Boynton as his girlfriend who comes to fuck everything up. And this is the PSA. It has been announced that Audition will be made into a film starring Lucy Liu and Charles Melton. I don't know yet about Lucy Boynton, but like, manifestation works. And I was so thrilled when I heard that news. Anyway, I had to briefly mention that as the book to film PSA, as well as manifestation really works, people, even if it gets uploaded or not. Oh, and I didn't upload it because I had talked about so many books and I had all of my castings. And then after the fact, I discovered that almost all of these books that I talked about already had a film adaptation. One of them is Butcher's Crossing. It stars Nicolas Cage. So I just didn't even bother editing the video and I just deleted the files. Sometimes that happens, NBD. But for the Nicolas Cage role, I had so deeply in mind Chris Pine for that role because I just had the vision of this complex character, somebody who you think is good, responsible, noble even. You see that in Chris Pine's face, only to realize that the good-naturedness that you took for granted, no, not the right phrase, that you assumed is actually inaccurate. And so I haven't seen this Nicolas Cage Butcher's Crossing yet. I will eventually, but you know, I have my Chris Pine vision and I'm actually pretty scared to imagine Nicolas Cage in this role. He's a scary actor. I know he can play this scary character. That's why I'm nervous to watch this, because of what I'm gonna see, how he's going to portray this complex and evil character. Oh my god, I'm wasting more time talking about other things in this September wrap-up video. Okay, September is my birthday month. Ben, my beloved Ben, would always do like a birthday month treat project, like reading project, where he tackles one big book. I believe one year it was The Count of Monte Cristo, that kind of thing. So I always kind of have those intentions every September. So my birthday treat, if you will, was to read Van Gogh, The Life by Stephen Naifeh and Gregory White-Smith. I mean, look at this. This is a this is a huge chunker. It's very dense. I mean, look at how small the writing is. And there are lots of images within the book, but there's also a lot of writing. And I had bought this book back in January with the intention of reading it sometime around my birthday time. I also had the audiobook for this as well to help and read, concurrently. Guys, I can't say that I loved this, easily, because this is not an easy book to digest. Having said that, I am so glad that I finally got over myself, got over this hurdle, finally tackled it and read it. It did indeed feel like a project to undertake. I mean, the cover is incredibly stunning. Vincent van Gogh is one of my favorite painters. People like to say that he is a genius because of his brushwork, his colors, the way that he just sees shapes, and nobody before him, nobody after him really did it the way that he did. He's an original. You gotta love an original voice. So that's how I felt about Van Gogh before reading this book. And then after reading this book, I feel like I know Vincent van Gogh way too well. I know way too much about him. This is definitely an art history book that blew away all art history books I've thus read so far. It opened my eyes to the way that art history books maybe should be sometimes. So this is where I'm going to kind of veer from my usual way of doing my wrap-ups by kind of not talking about a book one by one, but just my overall reflections of each book. But while I was reading Van Gogh, The Life, I was feeling like this book is so incendiary. Like, it was really throwing me for a loop of how I've been reading art history thus far. So I grabbed my copy of Taskin's Van Gogh, The Complete Paintings, because this book, which is from when is this from? 1988, written by Rainer Metzger. This is definitely one of those, like big coffee table books, like a big reference art book. I really bought it because it has full color reproductions of almost every image, but they're like, really good quality color reproductions, which is pretty hard to find unless you buy something like Taskin. Metzger's writing about Van Gogh, it's much more of an objective, if anything, sympathetic to Van Gogh and his life. And this is what I had thought initially of person who was Vincent van Gogh. And then I'm reading Stephen Naifeh's and Gregory White-Smith's version of Van Gogh, interpretation of Van Gogh, and yeah, my mind was blown with this, guys. I, still will read a book like this, very objective, very factual. And I'm not saying that this wasn't factual, but this definitely paints a stronger picture to the human being that Vincent van Gogh was, who his family were, who shaped his life. And it was actually disconcerting to see so clearly how I knew exactly who Van Gogh's parents were. His parents were like the conservative, old school, very Dutch parents with their like problematic goth kid son, Vincent, who they just didn't know what to do with. His brother Theo, who was his main benefactor, partner, enabler, was like the golden kid, but also, got into plenty of his own, I guess I'll call it fun. It was a fun time boy. What Van Gogh thought about all the other painters, like his peers, all those descriptions in this book instantly took me back to my art school days, what I thought about kids like Vincent, because it's not like his contemporaries were looking at his paintings and going, oh, wow, that looks really cool. They were going, that's not the way that paintings should look. That's what his peers were thinking at the time. They thought that he was, an idiot, that he doesn't know how to play the game, that he is completely going in his own direction away from the herd. And, most people don't even like that kind of stuff now, much less back then. He was the A24 to everyone else's Hollywood. He was unpopular. I could see why he would be unpopular. It just really made me feel like a Karen, because had I been one of his peers, I also would have made fun of him. I also would have been like, what is his problem? And he had so many. I know that he had mental illness issues, but knowing everything going on, I would still have given him such a hard time. And it's hard to think about things in those terms for an artist that you previously just, simply surface levelly admired from afar, separated by centuries. And I'm definitely not saying that I look at his paintings now and go, ugh, not by any means. But yeah, I just feel like I know way too much about him now. And the entire time I was reading this book, I was just thinking, oh man, they weren't kidding. Never meet your heroes. If you love reading art history, if you have any inclination of getting to know Vincent van Gogh and his whole entire life, his world, more in depth, I highly recommend this book. You will learn a lot. This fucked me up. That's all I'm saying. I don't know why I keep choosing like birthday fuck ups. Last year for my birthday, I watched the film The Nightingale. I don't recommend doing that. What was I thinking? But that also is a film unlike a lot of other films. It is very informative about British colonialism in Australia, about misogyny and penal colony culture. I still haven't gotten over that film. I don't think I'll ever get over this book. I loved it. I am continuing with the Cazalet Chronicles with the third installment, Confusion, by Elizabeth Jane Howard. This book also fucked me up a little bit because even though it's not like each book, the time span isn't a decade, it still feels like each decade of your life. Like the first book kind of felt like how your 20s feel. The second book kind of feels how your 30s feel. And then this third book really to me felt the way that your 40s feels. This remains a book where I love these characters as if they were real people. Somebody dies off screen and I audibly gasped. I grieved. A lot of parts, they have just dialogue with no indication of who is saying what, but you as the reader, who by now is very invested in this story and these families and these characters, we already know who is saying what. Which is a testimony of Elizabeth Jane Howard's mastery of being able to do that, of character building so strongly that the reader instantly knows just from context of who is saying what and what their opinions must be. It made me think about my parents when they were in their 40s, how they just seemed like they didn't have any fun anymore, like the twinkle in their eyes were gone, because they were dealing with a lot. They were dealing with a bratty child. They were dealing with their aging parents. They were dealing with their own crap, like, with work and with their own aging bodies. And this book is just big, is that all there is kind of vibes. Sure, there's like a World War II going on in the midst, but still, it's mostly about when you're hitting that wall of drudgery of adult responsibilities and there's no one else to do it but you. My birthday month, yay! But yes, I still love this so much. I read 9 stories by J.D. Salinger. This is for Ben Reads Goods Read Good Challenge. For Sapphire September, it's read any book with blue on the cover. I read Franny and Zoe earlier this year, and so I knew that I wanted to get to 9 stories as well. I know that J.D. Salinger didn't write very many books, but of them, 9 stories is like a collection of short stories. It's 9 of them. And I hear good things about this, and I agree. For Franny and Zoe, I acknowledge that it is extremely well written. He has exceedingly strong vision. I just felt like it was so Chandler Bingy with all of the italics in the way that everyone speaks. I thought it was like a shallow, fun romp. But in 9 stories, I appreciated Salinger's writing a lot more. Perhaps it's just me warming up to this very original singular voice. God forbid that I judge him for having some dramatic flair. Like, he writes slim books, but it's because he leaves so much unsaid, leaving a lot of room for the reader to like breathe inside this extremely stifling environment. Yeah, I like this one a lot. I read The White Darkness by David Grann. I read this as a library book. It's very slim. I think it's really like it began as a New Yorker article. David Grann is a writer for the New Yorker. He writes a lot of long form essays, mostly like biographies. He mostly writes about people, specific people, and I really just wanted to read this to be a David Grann completionist. As of now, I've read like all 5 of his major works. Because this is such a slim little thing, you know, from one of his articles, I thought that this would be like a low impact type of situation. It's not. It is not. If you also want to be a David Grann completionist, obviously you're not going to sleep on this, but this was so heady. This was so impactful. It really is just about this one guy, Henry Worsley, a British adventurer who decides to trek between like one side of Antarctica to another, or like one shelf. I don't know science. But, you know, while David Grann is talking about Worsley, he also talks about other explorers in history and their, like, reason for being. I am not at all the type of person to look at a mountain and go, I'm going to climb that thing because it's there. I mean, I do that for books, I suppose, but that is an indoor thing. That is an indoor activity. And I'm an extremely low risk choosing person, and I think David Grann is as well. There's a reason why he's a writer, but I think we both share, myself and David Grann, a similar approach in thinking about these people who are so polar opposites of us, who do to us crazy things simply because it's in their nature to. That's ultimately the vein of every story that David Grann chooses to write about. People who find themselves on the outskirts of society for whatever reason and finding their humanity, like David Grann, exposing their humanity and portraying their beautifully intricate, complex, interesting personalities. This one made me cry, had me on the edge of my seat. You know, in every David Grann, there's mentions of, like in the Lost City of Z, he talks about all of the bugs in the Amazon, large and microscopic. In The Wager, he talks about shipworms. And probably my favorite, The Killers of the Flower Moon, he talks about the most disgusting, vilest creature of all, the blatantly evil human being, corrupting everyone around themselves purely for the sake of immediate personal gain. And in The White Darkness, what was the most frightening, he talks about crevices being the most dangerous aspect of trekking around glaciers and the environment of the South Pole. But to me, it was this photo where the top photo was from the original trek from the early 1900s, and this bottom photo is of the 3 of them making it in the 2000s. It's supposed to be this incredibly proud moment of accomplishment, but for me it was terrifying because it just shows how nothing will stop human beings from doing what they set out to do, which, you know, if you look at it in like the what an accomplishment POV way, it's, I guess, inspiring. But for me personally, I just thought that was such a frightening, you know, parasitic behavior, because who are you hurting while you are on this journey? Like, what damage are you doing in order to achieve this dream? The story is the type of story that arises those types of thoughts, that makes you question human behavior. I found this incredibly thought-provoking, pretty much horrific, but it's not like I think that, you know, this guy is a bad person. It really just makes me think of how different everybody is in this world and the ramifications of that. Yeah, I really like this too. Really quickly, I found 3 more William Sonoma kitchen library books at secondhand stores, like at my library store, at what are they called, consignment stores. I recently discovered these series this year, and ever since Like, I found them at the library, I read a few, I loved them, purchased a lot from thrift books. And just ever since, every time I go into a charity shop, wherever they have used books, I always look in the cookbook section, keep my eyes peeled for these green spines, for these square books, and I've been finding more. This has become a new thrill in my life where, before I had no knowledge of the existence of these books. And now my eyes are like tuned in for them, to look for them. And it's a thrill every time when I find one in like good condition for me to buy. So I added these 3 to my collection. And so where I took an extremely sharp left detour this month is I just decided to read all 5 of the Twilight series books this month. Yeah, I don't regret at all this random spur of the moment decision. This was so much fun. I've never read these books until now. I've watched all the films many times. I try to only allow myself 1 annual rewatch. And reading these books are exactly what I thought that they would be. And I'm really glad that I finally got around to reading them. I kind of wondered if I regretted not having read them when I was a teenager when these books first came out. But maybe that was a bullet dodged. I probably would have been absolutely insufferable. I mostly read these series via audiobook, which was read by Ilyana Kadushin, except for the last one, Midnight Sun, which was read by Jake Abel. I definitely get the sense that I missed out on something significant by, coming to this so late that I was able to read all of these back to back, as opposed to waiting from 2005 Twilight to 2020 Midnight Sun. I'm sure I would have been absolutely feral if I had been a huge Twilight book fan at the time. And then when this Midnight Sun came out. Having said all of this, I've always really preferred the Twilight film, like the first film. Now that I've read all of the books, I think I still like the first book the best as well. And then this Midnight Sun, which is essentially like the Edward Cullen POV of Twilight. So it's really like Midnight Sun, you're rereading Twilight, just in Edward's POV. I really thought that this was like reading fan fiction, except that you're reading it from the writer who wrote the original content. I definitely feel like Stephenie Meyer over the years kind of had a chip on her shoulder about probably being perceived as less smart, especially since the filmmakers, from Catherine Hardwicke, the director, Kristen Stewart, and Edward Pattinson, all extremely, are they highbrow? Just like very big indie artists. Like the music choices for all of the films, they're really indie, and I felt like by Midnight Sun, she was trying to step up but she was still successful in retaining her original, like, raw, embarrassingly raw, wearing your heart on your sleeve kind of tone. Reading all of the Twilight books in 1 month just really made me realize how much I enjoy emotional spiraling, how much I enjoy feral obsessing. So I very much enjoyed reading the full Twilight series. It was extremely fun this month. Twilight and Midnight Sun are my favorites. At the end of the day, I just really like hearing a boy loving a girl so much, wanting to do everything for her, protect her, obsess over her, without it getting too gross. This was so maniacal. I appreciated it. I suppose this Twilight series could also be another like birthday project reading choice, especially because Bella's birthday is apparently, September 13. So that was also a nice part of it too. I didn't know that her birthday was in September. Another big September book that I wanted to get to this year is The Virgin Suicides by Jeffrey Eugenides. This is the first Jeffrey Eugenides book I've read. I've watched the film, I think once when I was young, but I don't think it really sunk in. I watched it after reading this book. They make great back-to-back comparison experiences because the book is its own thing, the film is very much its own thing, kind of like the Twilight Midnight Sun change of POVs, because the Virgin Suicides is told from the boy's perspective, while Sofia Coppola's film Virgin Suicides is told very much from the female perspective. But this was so moody, this was so atmospheric. This I definitely deeply regretted not having been an adolescent when I first read this. Another thing that I'm jealous of Gen Xers for. But also maybe it was better that I experienced adolescence first before reading about adolescence in this book. This book also made me understand the film Picnic at Hanging Rock better, that I also watched very recently. That is also an extremely vibey, moody film about girls and how we ultimately just don't get it. We don't get what it's really like to be a girl, who these girls are, like, truly. And then lastly, definitely not leastly, I read The Idiot and Either Or by Elif Batuman, and I had, high expectations for The Idiot. This is a booktube darling. This is a book that I have purchased and owned since 2020 when I discovered booktube for the first time. And everyone was talking about this book. This book came out in 2017. I vaguely knew that it's, again, about a young person and like a more or less coming of age story, but I don't think anything prepared me for the anxious headspace that is Celine's, that made me laugh out loud. There are so many funny lines in this book, but also is like so highbrow. Just the way that Celine thinks about things, the way that she analyzes everything, the way that she is experiencing something and then thinks of another thing, like a book that she's read or something else that she's picked up along the way, to kind of like compare and contrast her real life experience at hand. Yeah, I was gagging. I mean, Elif Batuman highbrowed the bloomin' onion, for Christ's sake. Come on. I just kept thinking of Tina Belcher when I was thinking of Celine. And this was a riot. I guess I mean to say, like, the expectations that I had for this book was along the lines of Lily King's Writers and Lovers, because both are, like about young people. They're both set in Harvard in the 90s, about writers. They're not the same at all. But that just made me happy, thinking that I am also able to bring up all these other references and am able to compare and contrast them because I have read them myself, and this book made me feel really good. I'll just keep it at that. And when I immediately followed it up with Either Or, I did feel the like I probably missed an integral part of this reading experience by, not having read The Idiot first and then waiting several years for the sequel to come out, which I did like just slightly less than The Idiot. I love The Idiot. Either Or is definitely has a more serious tone to it. It does talk about deeper matters like breast cancer and the madness of wanting to be in a relationship. This is definitely a little bit more mature while still staying in that early 20s time of your life. This has a lot more of like other cultural references, but more Anna Karenina and Greek myths and less Outback Steakhouse bloomin' onions and the Beatles, I guess. So still the same, if not just more intricate, yearning for fucking Yvonne. Why? My well-adjusted self just wishes that Celine can forget him, but I don't blame her. I might as well ask water to stop being wet. All the innocuous navel gazing makes it worth it anyway. Yeah, overall, I just really enjoyed being inside Celine's head. So between Celine, Bella and Edward, Vincent van Gogh, the Lisbon girls, September was a lot of horny obsessing. And I had a blast. I really love and appreciate how I make reading plans for the month, and every time there's always like some random asteroid that hurtles its way in and changes everything. So I'm very grateful for the Stephenie Meyer asteroid, I suppose. I'm really glad that I finally read The Idiot. I hear a lot of things about people saying like this is boring. I'm like, if you don't love me at my this, you don't deserve me at my this. I love Celine. I love Bella and Edward. Do I love Vincent van Gogh still? That remains to be seen. So that's everything that I read in the month of September. I am rushing. I need to get a lot of things done by the end of the week. And then I'm going to Paris for the first time. I've never been to Europe before. I called Sophie and I left her a very cringy voicemail going, bonjour. Une table pour toi, s'il vous plaît. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. And I am definitely planning on packing a couple of books even though I'm pretty sure I'm probably not going to have that much time to read them or will just be too exhausted to read them, I also still have like a few assignments to do while I'm there. My kid's gonna still have some assignments to do. We'll see. I think I'm gonna try and vlog a little bit, just really low key, low effort, and stuff my face with as much pastry that I can find, which I'm sure will be a lot. So that's where I'm at. That's what I've read this month. It was a grand old time. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time. Bye.